Bonjour, this is Jasmine. Thank you guys for stopping to smell the roses on Rue Madame. For those of you who are new to the neighborhood, I'm a writer, a storyteller, and a community builder. Today, I'd like to give you more of my life here in France, talking about my weekend. Last weekend, we went to Chartres, and hopefully you saw the video, and I explained to you how it was our first real outing. But this past weekend, we also took a trip, a weekend away. And this time it was to Normandy, which is on the west coast of France. And it was a much needed 3 days near the sea, and it was very refreshing. And our children really enjoyed the water and the beach and just the new scenery. So it was fantastic. I'll show you right now how it was. That was Normandy. We went to three beaches actually. We went to Omaha Beach, I think Sword Beach, and the DeVille Beach, which were all fantastic. They were different, absolutely different beaches altogether, the sand and the atmosphere. But it was really, really nice. And we also stopped by the American Cemetery, which I was kind of reluctant to go to because I've been to Normandy several times now, but I never stopped by the American Cemetery. It was very famous, and so since we had our kids with us and we had the time, I said, okay, let's stop by, see how it is. And it was really pleasant. I mean, given that's a cemetery, but the reason why I wanted to go, because seeing how we're in a history making time, a history capturing, time in our society, I thought it would be relevant and important to go and see what the cemetery was about and pay my respects to the men and women who died. And that was the World War II. And my husband was explaining to me how the Americans came in and it was like a bloodbath. I mean, if you're into history. And he was telling me how, because he's a really big history buff, and he was explaining the African American part of the history of World War II, which is often overlooked. So I thought it would be nice to share that part of the story with you guys, and how American troops, African American troops especially, were sent on the front lines and were used as, I wouldn't say pawns, but used as like the first wave of attack. And they were the first to go. And it really kind of connects back to current day and how Blacks are sent out on the front lines during this pandemic, and they're the first to get ill and get sick. And in the United States, especially, the number of African Americans who are falling ill and dying of this disease is, disproportionately affecting our community. Just to make that link, I thought it was pretty important to look how like history in this context today is quite similar, eerily similar, because the essential workers are Black and brown people. My mother's essential worker, my brother's essential worker. I have people in my family that's also in the hospitals, nurses, doctors, etc. So it's quite telling how we view essential workers and how much they're paid. I'll take the example of my mom. She's been working 20, 25 years at a grocery store, and her pay doesn't really reflect her work and how much she puts in, which is quite devastating. But during the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, she was given, or her company gave these essential workers a pay raise, but it was only briefly, it was only temporary. And it just goes to show how we really need to rethink the pay in the United States, healthcare, etc. But back to Normandy, the cemetery was immaculately kept. The lawns perfect, and they had white crosses for each burial, and they also had stars. I think that's for the Jewish soldiers who died in the war, and then there was other shapes. But we only stayed, I don't know, 15 to 30 minutes, and we just walked around and looked at the monuments, and just it kind of brought me back to that time, trying to just to visualize what was going on during that time. And with me, I had to do a little research when I got back home to say, what was going on, especially for the African American community during that time. And I learned that, not necessarily learned, but I was reminded that African Americans serving at that time had two victories that they were seeking. They were seeking victory against Nazi Germany, and they were also seeking a victory at home because they were still considered second-class citizens. And I read a little bit how the Black media kind of pushed this movement of changing the laws, trying to abolish Jim Crow, or to really relook how we're dealing with American citizens, considering we're going to war to save the citizens of Germany and Europe, but at home we still have lynchings and Jim Crow and segregation. I also learned that segregation in America was kind of a motto that was used by Nazi Germany and elsewhere to kind of do the same thing, practically, what we were doing in the United States at the time. So it was kind of like very hypocritical of the United States. So I guess it's just, the status quo. That's history. That's America's history. That's the root of American history. But I saw a part of a Langston Hughes poem that, I love poetry, but I saw this poem and I thought this was very appropriate for what Blacks at the time was looking at. So I'll read a bit of it. These events inspired by Langston Hughes' poem, Beaumont to Detroit. Funny that they're talking about Detroit here. 1943. It reads, "Looky here, America, what you done. Let things drift until the riots come. You tell me that Hitler is a mighty bad man. I guess he took lessons from the Ku Klux Klan. I ask you this question because I want to know how long I got to fight both Hitler and Jim Crow. I thought that was like spot on. I was like, wow. Langston Hughes, I have to like go back in my archives and get the old book, like look at his work. But it was just like, wow, wow. And how that goes back to current day, how we're in the streets fighting for justice, the current inequalities and segregation still is, rampant in the United States. How we're fighting for justice for Breonna still, and George Floyd, and Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on and on and on. And it's just like, we're still fighting a war. And that double V, the double victory that African Americans wanted, we got one. We got, World War II was victorious for the end of the Hitler regime. But in the United States, as far as equal rights, human rights, civil rights for African Americans and people of color, it's like we're still doing the same, finding the same thing. And I want to give an update to the video that I did about what do we do now after a protest. And I have something to add to my commentary. What we do after a protest, we keep protesting. That is what we do after a protest. Instead of it being Black History Month, let's make it Black History Year, Black History Decade, Black History, for the next 100 years. Like, seriously, let's not stop, uplifting and prioritizing Black and brown life, Black and brown history. Hence this video that is really giving homage to the men who died, but especially the men who died of people of color who were used and put on the front lines of this war. And, they came back home and they didn't get the housing that they deserved. They didn't get the pay that they deserved. They didn't get the recognition that they deserve. So, let's keep fighting. So, Normandy was pleasant. It was nice. The weather was great. There was rest, relaxation. My kids enjoyed themselves. My husband enjoyed himself, and wasn't like a really long ride either. We were there and back in less than like 2 hours. It was great. But I just wanted to give you an update on what I've been doing and what's to come. If you have any comments, questions, or ideas to bring my way, I'm happy to receive that. Thank you so much for liking and subscribing to my channel, and head over to patreon.com and read the essay that I wrote about mental health and a look at our self-care. And I think you'll enjoy it. So thank you for your support, and I'll see you next time. Bye.